Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Metro Board activities of October 28th and to the Finance and Capital Committee meeting. Since this is our first meeting of the day, I'm going to turn the floor over to our Chief Safety Officer, Teresa Impastato, for our safety contact to start us off.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. October is Fire Prevention Month. The goal of fire prevention is to raise fire safety awareness and to help ensure your home and your family have a plan and are ready for the unexpected. As the seasons change, now is the perfect time to talk with your family about fire safety, including testing smoke and carbon monoxide alarms, changing batteries and smoke detectors, or upgrading to 10-year sealed battery alarms, reviewing how to use a fire extinguisher, and planning escape routes. For more information on things you can do to increase your fire safety, visit nfpa.org. That concludes our safety contact.
Thank you, Ms. Impastato. Again, this is the Board's Finance and Capital Committee meeting of October 28th, 2021. Mr. Latorno cannot be with us today, so as Vice Chair of the committee, I'll be chairing today's meeting. Mr. Alcorn will be serving in Mr. Latorno's place. Since this is our first meeting of the day, I'm going to ask the Board Corporate Secretary to take the roll call.
Thank you. Alternate Director Alcorn.
Present.
Committee Vice Chair Slater.
Present.
Director Babers.
Here.
Director Klein.
Present.
Director Smedberg.
Present.
Alternate Director Bulger. Alternate Director Bulger.
Present.
Director Drummer.
Present.
And Director Martin Proctor.
Present.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you. Our first order of business today is to approve the agenda. If there are no objections, I'm going to consider the agenda approved as presented. Are there any objections by members of the committee to the agenda? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Now I'm going to go on to approval of the minutes. We have the minutes of the October 14th meeting. Are there any objections to the minutes as presented? Hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. So thank you and welcome this morning. There are two items on our agenda this morning. Our first action is will be to resume the discussion on the updated fair policy principles. The board and this committee in particular has been discussing Metro's fair policy over the past several months, and these updated principles will help guide the development of the potential fair policy changes, both in the coming fiscal year 2023 budget and beyond. Next, our staff will review ridership and revenue assumptions that will be used in the development of Metro's 2023 budget. And then we will begin by resuming our discussion on the proposed fair policy principles. This item was laid on the table at the committee's last meeting, so I'm going to ask for a motion from the committee member to take this item from the table.
I make the motion to take this item from the table.
Okay.
And I'll second it.
Great, thank you. I think I'll take it from the table, and now I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Tom Webster for presentation.
Thank you, Secretary Slater and members of the committee. Just very briefly to recap, as you mentioned, the committee has been considering draft fair policy principles. They are most recently updated over a decade ago. The draft principles before the committee are focused on 5 key areas, being customer focused, simple and convenient, equitable, seamless, and built to drive ridership. And with that, Mr. Chairman or Mr. Vice Chairman, I'll turn it back to you for the committee's discussion. Thank you.
Great, thank you. So I'll ask everyone to use the kind of raise hand function if there are any questions for Mr. Webster as we revive this discussion. Okay, thank you. So we have the motion seconded from the table. So when the discussion was tabled, I'm sorry, I'm losing track of my meeting here, but all in favor of taking this motion from the table?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you. So the motion has been removed from the table, and when the discussion was tabled at our last meeting, there was an amendment on the floor for discussion. I'd like to offer a substitute motion for the amendment and move the amendment to the proposed fair policy principles as follows. In the second resolved clause, the fifth bullet is deleted in its entirety and replaced with the following: built to drive ridership, maximize ridership to support service and regional mobility. Second, the second resolved is further amended to add the sixth bullet to read: generate revenue to maintain financial and service stability, ensure revenue and cost efficiency to maintain the financial health and sufficient service. Can I get a second for this substitute motion?
Second.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Is there any discussion on the proposed amendment? Again, please use the raised hand function if you have any questions. Seeing none, I'll ask the Board Corporate Secretary to call a vote for the amendment.
Thank you. Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater,
Aye.
Ms. Babers,
Aye.
Ms. Klein.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Now on to the discussion of the main motion as amended. And then following, I'll ask the Board Corporate Secretary to call the vote. So any discussion?
Okay, hearing none. Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater,
Aye.
Ms. Babers,
Aye.
Ms. Klein.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes.
Great, thank you so much. Next item on our agenda is an information item on the 2023 ridership and revenue forecast. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Dennis Anasiki for an update on that.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary and members of the committee. Do you see my slides?
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Secretary, each October, staff prepares a ridership and revenue outlook that guides Metro's budget development for the upcoming fiscal year. This year, given COVID-19's impact on Metro's ridership, operations, and revenue, staff has prepared two ridership scenarios, along with an operating budget forecast, in order to provide the committee with a broader picture of Metro's financial outlook for fiscal year 2023. As with past budgets, staff will use the committee's guidance on ridership and subsidy to develop Metro's next operating budget. As we have all witnessed, COVID-19 has had dramatic impacts on Metro's ridership and revenue, as it has on other transit systems. The good news is that ridership is starting to bounce back. However, the effects of the pandemic are expected to linger over the next coming years. In fiscal year 2021, ridership rebounded to 26% of pre-COVID level, compared to 25% ridership recovery assumed in Metro's current budget, or rather in FY 2021 budget. More significantly, Metro Bus carried twice as many trips as Metro Rail as office workers teleworked. In the current fiscal year, Mr. Chairman, ridership and fare revenues are actually doing better than budget.
Mr. Anasiki, can I stop you a second? Your slides are not moving, so I'm not certain if that's an issue on our end.
You should be seeing slide 4.
I still see the title slide. I'm not sure if others are seeing something different.
Okay. Something. Something is off. Let me try and reload. Thank you.
Now it's moving for me. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So as I was saying that last year bus carried more riders than rail, which historically is the opposite. But that this year we're reverting back to the norm, with rail doing far better than budget with respect to both ridership and revenue. However, we expect that the effects of the pandemic will continue over the next few years, hence the two ridership scenarios. The first ridership scenario, Mr. Chairman, builds on current ridership trends and assumes that Metro will recover 100% of its ridership by the year 2025. This slide shows actual and assumed ridership through the current fiscal year, which is shown in the dark shaded region. Future ridership scenarios for fiscal year 2023 through 2025 is in the blue shaded area. Under this ridership scenario, Metro will recover 55% of its ridership in the next coming year, 75% in 2024, and get to 100% of ridership recovery in the fiscal year 2025. As shown in the previous slide, the gradual ridership scenario will result in 173 million trips provided in fiscal year 2023, with about 52% of those trips on Metro Rail. That equates to about 48% pre-COVID recovery on Metro Rail. The remaining trips, except for 1 million trips, as you can see on the slide here, which we expect to come from Metro Access, are projected to be on Metro Bus, amounting to about a 60% pre-COVID ridership recovery ratio for Metro Bus. Projected total fare revenues in 2023, based on this gradual ridership scenario, is $316 million, as you see in the total row of column 4. This is a huge drop from pre-COVID revenue, due in part to changing peak usage, the recent fare changes to attract riders, and increasing fare evasion. Similarly, non-fare revenues is projected to reach $82.4 million in fiscal year 2023, with lower parking and advertising revenue as major drivers for that slower growth. Overall, when you add the passenger revenues and the non-passenger revenues together, Metro is expected to receive $398 million in FY 2023, which you can see from the slide is almost $426 million below pre-COVID levels, as shown on the variance row of column 4. As I noted at the start of the presentation, this slide shows Metro's fiscal year 2023 operating budget forecast. This forecast is based on Metro's current service levels, which is the basis for the fiscal 2023 budget projection. So when you subtract the projected expenses from total revenues and available subsidy, what's left is a $692 million funding gap for FY 2023, which in this scenario is closed using federal relief funding. This slide shows preliminary operating subsidy for fiscal year 2023 based on the current legislation and allocated among jurisdictions. As we have done in the past, the final subsidy will be determined once final service and fare structures are established and then reviewed with the jurisdictions prior to committee consideration. Now, the second relative scenario is more conservative, reflecting surveys that current trip patterns may be permanent, as employees and some employers show limited appetite to return to the office, at least at the present time. Compared to slide 6, which had a more gradual return of ridership, this scenario assumes ridership will not fully recover to its pre-COVID levels. Instead, it assumes that Metro will recover 167 million trips in fiscal year 2023, compared to the top line ridership of 173 million trips, which is shown in the top line of the blue shaded area. In this scenario, ridership will rebound to 53% instead of 55% in fiscal year 2023, with Metro Rail still making up about 52% of total trips. And again, with respect to fare revenue, we're projecting that total fare revenue will be 304 million trips, $4 million under this more conservative ridership scenario, which is still an increase of $145 million over the current fiscal year, but certainly less than under a more moderate ridership rebound. Similarly, total non-fare revenue is projected at $82 million in fiscal year 2023, again tied to lower parking and advertising revenues. Slide 19 shows Metro's total operating revenue at $386 million for this ridership scenario, along with the pre-COVID revenue variance of $438 million. That's how much revenue Metro needs to make up just to get to where Metro was just a few years ago. Slide 20 shows the same projected operating cost for fiscal year 2023 that we saw on slide 11. And again, this projection is based on essentially on current expense structure. And slide 21, again, does the same exercise of subtracting expenses from projected revenues and available subsidy, but in this case leaves a slightly larger deficit of $705 million for fiscal year 2023. And this slide, as we saw in the other slide, shows preliminary subsidy allocations, which we will be finalizing in the next few months, reviewing with the jurisdictions, and then providing to the committee for its consideration. The next two slides show dates and milestones in Metro's budget process, with this showing the next steps. And with today's outlook, the general manager's proposed budget is due to the committee next month, followed by other steps, including public outreach and the budget in early spring. Mr. Chairman, that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Anosike. Since I expect there's going to be several comments and questions on this item, I'm going to start by going around the table. I may kind of start with a couple, just kind of two general questions. First, on slide 23, if you could go back to kind of that process for me, just kind of where we are in the process. I think I'd like to kind of understand that a little bit.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so we do have some time. So do you anticipate any major or even minor kind of changes to this as it kind of goes forward in the process before it comes to the board, or is there an update that comes through that?
So at this point, we do not anticipate significant changes to this process, but as I think as we all saw last year, the pandemic forced the board to take additional steps and additional reviews. And so if that is the case this year, we will certainly adjust to the board schedule.
Thank you. And then, I'm more curious. I'm trying to understand kind of this compared to, because I just see a lot of uncertainties and a lot as we're trying to project these, what does that look like and how are we comparing our model for recovery to some of the other systems across the globe?
Great question, Mr. Chairman. We have done significant outreach and continue to do so both regionally and nationally through APTA as well as through individual contacts with the major transit agencies across the nation to understand their perspectives with respect to ridership and revenue going forward. And based on those series of actions, including surveys that Metro itself has done with respect to regional travel patterns, we are confident that the two ridership options that we've presented to the board will should guide the actions that we take and the recommendations that we make to the committee for next fiscal year. Obviously, along with that, we are monitoring what's going on at the federal level with respect to both vaccine acceptance and directions with regional employers in terms of employees coming back to work. I think all of those data sets combined give us some confidence that the numbers that we've provided to the committee today should be a reasonable basis for moving forward.
Mr. Chairman, if I could.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the other thing as we look across the globe, obviously every system has its own uniqueness, but the added uniqueness here is the federal workforce. So we are really monitoring that very closely because that could swing either way, as you can imagine. If that came back in full service, with such a role they played in our peak service period. So that's a little unique piece that we got to monitor very, very closely going forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Let me first start with the committee. I'll go kind of around the committee. Mr. Alcorn, any questions?
Yeah. When will we see any projections or even ballpark on FY 2024?
So, Mr. Alcorn, thank you very much for that question. We are doing some analysis with respect to FY 2024 and expect that the committee will see some of that when the general manager's budget recommendation is submitted to the committee next month.
Okay. All right. That will be helpful. Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's it.
Great. Thank you. Ms. Babers?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So just a couple of questions. Remind me, what is the remaining amount of our federal funding from the stimulus?
We have I want to say slightly less than $800 million left at the end of this fiscal year that could go towards future fiscal years.
Okay. And then I'm assuming that this presentation does not take into consideration any impact of reduced ridership based on these last 2 weeks of reduced service.
So this outlook looks towards FY 2023 and beyond. And so to the extent there's been some reduction in the ridership in the current fiscal year, that will not be part of that analysis unless we think that it will continue to impact what happens in FY 2023.
Okay. And how again did you all choose 53% and 55%?
So we typically start by looking at our current environment, and based on what we've seen with ridership this current fiscal year, we are trending, as I indicated, we are running ahead of the 34% that we used in developing the FY22 budget, but trending towards a 50 to 53% range, 55% range for next fiscal year. So what we've tried to do is to provide the committee with an option, recognizing that with all the vagaries of ridership, it could swing across a continuum that we think will fall within that particular range.
Okay. All right. Mr. Chairman, that's all I have.
Great, thank you. Ms. Klein?
Great, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have 2 questions. One is I was curious about the April timeframe for federal applications, federal grant applications. I assume that's money that essentially is designated for WMATA, and it's just those are not uncertain funds. The process is more administrative to do the application and get those funds.
That is correct. Again, thank you for the question. The reason that is provided here is to, one, demonstrate to the board that staff is focused on making sure that we're putting those applications timely, because the history has been that, at least in the past, some of those applications did not go in until years after, and that caused significant financial challenges for the region and for Metro.
Great, thank you. And my second question is, earlier this week, there was a survey released by a regional organization, the Greater Washington Partnership, that looked at responses from employers around the region. And the response as of when the survey was done was that about 68% of employees were expected to be back in the office by next summer. And I was curious when I was looking at that, how that relates to the ridership estimates that you've presented, whether if 68% of employees were back next summer, would that be closer to the more optimistic scenario, or would it be closer to the more conservative scenario? Just trying to kind of reconcile those 2 things.
As the general manager mentioned, with respect to federal employees, we are obviously monitoring both perceptions and actual actions with respect to the private sector side of the employment market. The report that you mentioned, I think, also suggested that the perception did not turn out to be reality, at least when the initial surveys were done. And so we've tried to be a little bit more conservative in our assumptions with respect to what's going to happen with ridership and with employees coming back to work. And based on most of the things that we're seeing so far, it appears that while employees and employers remain optimistic, the desire is, or the appetite for folks to actually come back to work is far diminishing.
So you'd say your projections are a little more conservative than the potentially optimistic view of employers in the region.
That's accurate. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Let me now shift to other members of the board. Mr. Smedberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Dennis, I think it was on slide 8. Did it show that the bus fare was declining? Is there a reason for that? Is it because of some of the transfer policy things we did, or is there something else that explains that? Or
Yeah, can you see slide 8, Mr. Chairman?
I think it was slide 8.
Yeah, I mean, I tried to go back to it. I'm just wondering if you can see it now.
We still see the dates and milestone slide. I know that's what I see.
Okay, let me try to get slide 8. So.
What up here? I'm diligent. Let's see.
Okay, yes, sir. Slide 8. This slide, right?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not seeing the slides either, like the chair, but I'm pulling it up on diligent. Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so we see Metro bus total revenues as going down, and the average fares is also declining. You are absolutely right, Mr. Chairman. The reasons include the fact that the board took certain actions lately to help drive ridership back, right, in terms of the transfers and in terms of the reduced prices and the limited discount on passes. But in also, but furthermore, we're also, as the committee is aware, we're also seeing increased fare evasion on bus, which is much higher than it was pre-pandemic level. Those factors are what's driving the average fare for Metro bus.
Okay. And then I also noticed, I think it was on the next slide. Oh yeah. The parking and advertising budgets, they're showing significant increase. What's the reasoning behind that?
Okay. With respect to parking, what we've done is calibrate expected parking utilization to the growth that we've built in with respect to ridership, going to 55% in this particular case. And with respect to advertising, we're actually seeing, we expect that we're going to do better this year. Initially, when the FY 22 budget was put together, we expected a significant drop off on advertising revenue.
Yeah, I know we talked about it. Yeah.
But it has been up, and we expect to trend around $14 million in the current fiscal year.
Okay, great. And Sarah asked one of my other questions, so thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Smithberg. Mr. Drummer, any questions?
A couple of comments. Thank you, Mr. Chair. The first, I want to applaud your conservative approach in dealing with FY23. I think the 55 and 53 scenarios, percent scenarios, are very good. And in the future, just a caution and a concern would be the 75 to 100% ridership returns. With all of those converging forces that we have moving in 2025, with our federal relief drop off, with uncertainty in ridership based on remote workforce trends and the revenue shortfalls associated with it. What I see is a tremendous gap in 24 or perhaps 25, and haven't heard much dialogue on where we're going. So something to consider. I know we have a lot of time to work on it, and look forward to seeing what the outcome will be.
Which will do. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Drummer. Mr. Bulger, any questions or comments?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It seems to me that the 55 and 52, why don't we just split the difference and just have one scenario in between the two amounts that were presented? They're so close together. I just don't see the reason to have two scenarios. What do you think about that, Dennis?
You're absolutely right, Mr. Borger. They are close, and obviously, we will be looking for direction from the committee to go with one of the models, and if the committee chooses to advise staff to use the lower model, we'll certainly do so.
Well, all I'm saying, Dennis, that they're so close together that doesn't give me a whole lot of credence. Why don't we just pick one?
That's what I was saying, Mr. Bolger. If we're going to pick one, I would recommend the lower ridership model.
I would agree with the lower 52%. Mr. Chairman, I would look to you, Secretary Slater, as to what we should do here or have a discussion about it.
Yeah, sure. I'm certainly always open to a discussion. I think we also have time to kind of think about where we want to go in further discussions as well. But Dennis, any kind of thoughts or perspective on kind of where we are with the two different scenarios, or whether there's value in kind of reconciling that, or value in kind of holding course and then refining as we move further down the road?
Mr. Chairman, I think, again, as there's several things that could happen between now and then. I think if the committee chooses, I will suggest using the 53 model. And to the extent, if revenues do better, if riderships do better, obviously the upside is good, and the board can take and the committee can take additional action then. But I will not. I would rather recommend the 53% model than the 55.
Yeah, I would tend to agree, but I do think there's kind of time to kind of work through this as we move forward. But any further questions or comments, Mr. Bolger?
No, Mr. Chairman, I think we had a small discussion about the 53. I misspoke and said 52. I meant 53. I apologize, but maybe 54 would be the right number to go with, Secretary Slater.
Sure. Great, thank you. Ms. Martin Proctor, any questions or comments?
Hello, no, I do not have any questions or comments at this time. Thank you so much for the presentation. And I know that we're all going to move forward judiciously as we continue to reopen and see what these numbers are going to look like. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I think I'll close with that kind of excellent point as well, is there's just so many uncertainties on where we are today. And there's so many factors that are well beyond the control of what we can do. We just have to deliver the best and most reliable service that we can, and continue to keep our system safe and get the ridership back. But thank you, Mr. Anasiki.
Mr. Chair.
Mr.
Chair, I have, you know, I was looking at my notebook. I have one other question, Dennis. I had a question about the legislative exclusions. What are we looking at in that area for 23 or even 24? Because I have that as a question. I think it maybe came up last time, or I wrote it down. I can't remember. But anyway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The legislative exclusions in this case include four items, I believe. The primary one being the additional server line service. If you recall, the board reduced the server line budget last year in recognition of the fact that it will be starting in the second half of the fiscal year. So this for next year, we are adding the required subsidy back into the budget, along with Potomac and Juneteenth holiday. You know, other than that, the only other thing is some minimal additional safety directed activities that require funding. Those are the three things that add up to the $49 million in additional. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Smedberg. With no further business to come before the committee, we stand adjourned. I'll turn the floor back over to Mr. Smedberg to begin the executive committee meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now we'll I want to welcome everyone to the Metro Board's Executive Committee meeting of October 28, 2021. First is the approval of the agenda. If there are no objections, we'll consider the agenda approved as presented. Are there any objections by any of the committee members? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Next, move on to the approval of minutes. We have minutes of our October 14th, 2021 meeting and executive session before us for approval. Are there any objections to the minutes as presented? Okay, hearing none, we'll consider the minutes approved as presented. We have one information item today, and that is the fiscal year 2021 external audit. The committee will hear from Metro's external auditors on the authority's financial statement audit. Section 70A of WMATA Compact requires that, quote, the report of the annual independent audit shall be prepared in accordance with generally accepted auditing principles and shall be filed with the chairman and other officers of the board shall direct. This does not require board or committee action. I'll now turn the floor over to our Inspector General, Jeff Charrington, who will direct the audit, who directed the audit, and will introduce our external auditor to provide the overview of its findings. Mr. Charrington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. Good morning. Before I hand it over to Mr. Bonet from RSM, I would like to wish Joe Wilson a happy retirement. This is his last board meeting, our Deputy Inspector General for Audits. So, Joe, thank you for your leadership. And with that, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Mr. Bonet from RSM, our external auditors.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Dan Bonnet. I'm joined here today by Jen Katz, who is my fellow partner, served on the account with us this year. Jen has pulled up a slide presentation that we will just talk through at a high level. We did share most of these communications with this committee when we met 2 weeks ago. Just to provide you a quick update, Jen, if we could move forward. So at this point, we have issued our opinion on the financial statements as of and for the year ended June 30, 2021. That opinion is dated October 22nd, and our opinion on those financial statements is unmodified, which is to say that the financial statements are fairly stated in all material respects in accordance with GAAP. You will note in looking at the opinion that there is an explanatory paragraph that is included this year, which has not been included in prior years. That paragraph is included because of the adoption of a new accounting standard in the current year, GASB 84, which deals with fiduciary activities, which required that 2 of the pension plans be reported as fiduciary component units of the authority. So the paragraph that was added to the opinion is just highlighting the fact that this standard was just adopted, and this paragraph is included. As it relates to the single audit, which is the audit that we perform contemporaneous to the financial statement audit of the federal grant programs, we have substantially completed that work. However, at this point, we are waiting for the OMB to issue the addendum. There's supposed to be 2 addendum that they plan to issue to the compliance supplement for this year. Until those are released, we are not sure whether or not we have completed all of the audit work required by the federal government. So we will shelve the rest of the project at this point until we receive the additional guidance from the federal government. And Jen, if you could just walk us through a couple of the things that have highlight a couple of things that have changed since our last meeting.
And Don, if I could, before we move on, just ask you a quick question about that.
Sure, yeah.
Why the delay from OMB? Is it just given the nature of work right now, or is there something more significant?
So this is fairly common when the federal government issues these sort of stimulus programs to react to shocks to the economy. Okay. So they rush a whole bunch of money out into the economy to create the stimulus. However, all of the rules and regulations that go with it lag by several months. So the exact same thing happened last year with the first round of CARES Act funding. And if you go back to the ARA funding back in 2008, the exact same thing back in 2001 after 9/11. So it's fairly common that it happens when these events occur, and we're sort of subject to the whim of when they provide us the information.
So nothing then concerning that we should be concerned about in terms of any kinds of operations or processing on WMATA side then?
Yeah, not that we're aware of. I mean, based on everything we've tested so far, and we'll talk about this in a minute, we haven't identified any concerns.
Okay.
Management is on top of these things as they develop. So.
All right. Thank you. Sorry about that, Jen.
No, certainly. And any questions that come up along the way, please, feel free to let us know. So we had previously gone over, we have essentially two types of what we call misstatements that could come up on the audit. One would be a recorded misstatement, which is something that we identify, bring to the attention of management, and they actually record an adjusting entry. So there have been no changes, and this is the table we had previously presented, so there's no changes there. The other category would be uncorrected misstatements, which could be items that come up during the audit, we talk to management about, and they elect ultimately not to record any adjusting entry because management concludes they're not material to the financial statements as a whole. The first two items in this table here were previously communicated. There's one new item, and this actually is really the result of internal controls that are in place by management, where they do their own analysis subsequent to year end for any potential additional liabilities that need to be accrued for that haven't been. And as a result of their additional analysis, about 4.3 million was recognized that management reached a conclusion was not material. They were not going to record the adjustment for. RSM was comfortable that it was not material as well. So that's just a new item that shows up here as what we call an uncorrected misstatement. And then the other new item is here, and there's a lot of words on the screen, but I'll summarize. Essentially, whenever there's actuarial analysis involved by management, we also then bring in our own internal firm actuarial specialist. There was just one pension plan where we still, from a high level, concluded that everything was reasonable, but there was one mortality table used that our internal actuaries didn't believe was the most up-to-date recent mortality table that could have been used. So had the most up-to-date table been used, there could have been an additional approximately 12.7 million of liability. So this was considered a judgmental, uncorrected misstatement. But again, at the end of the day, the overall balances for that pension plan were considered reasonable. No other changes here. Dan, I know just you wanted to kind of close the loop on our summary since our last discussion, so I'll turn it back to you.
Thanks, Jen. Yeah, so when we met last, we talked about one of the recorded or past adjusting entries, which represented a reclassification within the balance sheet from the prior year audit, so the FY20 audit. So that matter was resolved in the current year, and the only open question as of the last time we met is whether or not that would have to be considered a reportable finding. So we have concluded that in fact it is not a reportable finding. So as a result of the engagement, there are no findings to date that we are reporting. And the only caveat to that would be if something comes out of whatever this new guidance is that could be forthcoming that will be forthcoming from the federal government. But as of today, we have no findings to report. And that should be the end of our update. So we open it to any questions, thoughts, or comments you might have.
Well, that's certainly a good way to end with no findings. Have that one open item, certainly. I'll open it up to first to the committee members. Any committee members have any questions or comments? Lucinda?
I don't have anything. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you. Secretary Slater?
Nothing for me, thank you.
Okay. Ms. Klein?
I have no questions. Thanks for the presentation.
Okay. Anyone else have a question? If you'd use your raise hand function. Okay. Seeing none, Mr. IG, any final comments from you?
Well, thank you, Dan, for the presentation. And I'd also like to thank the general manager and his staff for all their cooperation, and congratulations on the clean audit. That's all I have, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it is good to see. And given where we were, Jeff, I don't know, Paul, how many years ago now and how far we've come with all this, and Dan, the work from your team too, to help us get to this point. Is it's really good to see these encouraging and positive audit reports. So thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, just one comment.
Yeah, Paul, go ahead.
Yeah. Hey, I wanted to congratulate Joe Wilson, obviously on his retirement. He's been a partner. He's had a role to play, and he's played it very well as an auditor. And I thank him for all his service that I've been here and before I got here. And the RSM team, again, I know this has been very difficult with the pandemic. Go back and forth and get the information, and I hope that we've been responsive to all of your needs throughout. And then also, I want to thank Dennis's entire team for the work that they've done, obviously over the years, but particularly last year, given all the other pressures that we've all been facing, to get you the information and be responsive as we could. So I just wanted to recognize that, because again, I think it's all of us together. If there's issues, let's address them. And let's get to the bottom. And I think this is a good example of that. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Paul. All right, Dan and Jen, thanks again. Appreciate it. Take care now. All right, with no further business to come before this committee, we stand adjourned. We'll now move directly to the Board of Directors meeting. Are we good, Ms. Ellison?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. I'm Paul Smedberg, Chair of the WMATA Board of Directors, and thank you for being with us here today for our Directors meeting of October 28th, 2021. Before we begin, I'll ask Ms. Ellison, Board Corporate Secretary, to please call the roll. Ms. Ellison.
Thank you. Chair Smedberg.
Present.
Vice Chair Babers.
Here.
Vice Chair Slater.
Present.
Director Klein.
Present.
Alternate Director Alcorn.
Here.
Alternate Director Bolger.
Present.
Director Drummer.
Present.
And Director Martin Proctor.
Present.
Mr. Chair, you have a quorum. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. One additional item before we begin this morning. As of yesterday, October 27, 2021, board member Sarah Klein is no longer a subcontractor to WSP, and therefore Ms. Klein does not have a conflict of interest regarding WSP. As a result, Ms. Klein has withdrawn her recusal from the Capital Program Update, Agency Safety Plan Update, Metro Rail Fleet Management Plan, and Draft Metro Bus Fleet Plan, and will participate in these and other matters in which WSP is an interested party. So I wanted fellow board members to know that. Next item is approval of the agenda. We have the agenda before us. If there are no objections, I'd like to consider the agenda approved as presented. Does anyone have any objections? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Next item of business, approval of the minutes. We have 5 sets of minutes for approval. September 23rd, 2021 board meeting, executive sessions from September 23rd, 2021, October 14th, 2021, October 18th, 2021, and October 20th, 2021. I'd like to consider these minutes approved as presented. Does anyone have any comments, objections, corrections to those minutes? Okay, hearing none, the minutes are approved as presented. Thank you. Next, we'll move on to public comment and advisory body reports. Now for the public comment section. First, we'll hear from our customers and stakeholders who submitted comments for the board. Mr. Pasek, we can begin.
Okay, great. My colleague is going to pull up the slides here.
Oh, okay, thank you. Thanks, John.
Jose?
Public comments for today's meeting, October 28, 2021. First comment from Paul Hartman of the District of Columbia. As the MTA considers its proposed FY22 budget, I think it's important for the board to consider the daily cost to the system of fare evaders. Every day I see people jump the turnstiles, push through, or use the handicap gate and never pay their fare. Why do I pay my fare every day so that others can blatantly not pay theirs? The district is being plagued by severe violence, much of it that with firearms. In years past, when people were stopped and questioned after jumping the turnstile, how many weapons were found and taken off our streets? I understand the idea of low-level crimes, and yes, this is a crime, can lead to the introduction of our youth to the criminal justice system, and that has lifelong repercussions. But when the MTA board last year was talking about service cuts and budget deficits, I was riding the Metro to work every day with fare evaders. This must be addressed, and if the MTA needs to go to district council and call for the laws on fare evasion to be strengthened or to the Metro Police to enforce the law, the board needs to do that. Or maybe a station PSA campaign, pay your fair share, it's the law, and empower your station managers to address those that push through. You cannot talk about fares and not address its pressuring issue. I implore each of you to spend a day in the Metro station booth and count how many, mostly teenagers and folks in their 20s, disregard their obligation as customers of this service and push through without paying their fair share. Thank you for your consideration. I know the board has many more pressing issues to consider, but it's a real issue that deserves attention.
Our next comment is from Valerie Salvery from Fairfax County. First of all, I would like to thank the bus drivers who come out to work so we can get to work. But the bus schedule has changed for the 2A since the pandemic, and after almost 18 months, where I see the return of the 1B, more service on the 2B and the 1C, the 2A schedule has remained the same. The bus comes every half hour in rush hour and sometimes 3/4 of an hour. Please, please, at least in rush hour every 15 minutes. Please, thank you so very much. Valerie Salford.
Next comment from Maria from Prince George's County, Maryland. Hello, Board of Directors. Paying customers have been complaining about the 89M bus in the Greenbelt Metro Station for the last 3 months. The bus never shows up, especially during rush hour. You fill out complaint forms and no one gets back to you. You call, and by the off chance that someone answers the phone, they answer with attitude, letting you know that everyone is complaining and there's nothing they can do. I actually had a customer service rep tell me if I was so dissatisfied with the Metro, maybe I should start Ubering. I don't think it's the way to increase rider use. It seems like in minority neighborhoods like Greenbelt and PG, Maryland, the buses run late, and even at all, and the white neighborhoods, it's all good. I mean, as I type this email, I've been on a hold with Metro for 30 minutes while they go investigate why the 5:40 p.m. bus bound for arrival at Greenbelt Metro Station. My guess, she's running down the time until 6:30 when she will probably hang up on me. I've also tweeted with MATA Metrobus, and no one seems to know or care that people are out here waiting for the bus to show up. I'm literally contacting everyone I can to see if this issue can be helped. The 89M bus doesn't run, and no one seems to care.
Next comment is from Brian Matthey from Fairfax County, Virginia. Where is the money going to come from? DC's and Council wants to give $100 per month ridership on WMATA. Ridership is not the issue. Paying ridership is the issue. Okay, DC, pay the bill, not free. $100 for 700,000 people in DC, that is $70 million per month. $840 million, I assume, per year. Where is the money going to come from? Vote no unless DC is forking up the bill. I pay my taxes in Virginia. I guess Metro does not need Virginia's money this year. Thank you.
Next comment, John Samuels from the District of Columbia. Please hold current Metro staff, including executive staff, accountable for the current debacle. Just as children were getting back into a school routine and after dealing with 1.5 years of pandemic, now all the kids that were planning to rely on the Metro have to deal with another major interruption. Metro had 1.5 years of low ridership to deal with this, and it is infuriating that poor leadership necessitates dealing with it now. Please hold current Metro staff, including executive staff, accountable. Please appoint board members who prioritize safe, reliable, and timely train service over all else.
Next is from Tomoko Jones from Arlington County, Virginia. We understand Metro has to inspect all 7,000 series trains. Today, we were stuck at National Airport Metro Station more than 10 minutes because of a routine track inspection at Braddock Metro Station, so the service is single track only. Every 30-minute train schedule, it's already frustrating. Then regular rail inspection during morning time. Can you do it during nighttime after the Metro service ends?
Next comment, James Gentile, Fairfax County, Virginia. Why does WMATA's board tactically approve of one, complete disregard of timelines of train departures, i.e. train leaves before time stated on information panels? 2, terrible communication by staff when a train is delayed and I get to walk 2 miles to my next stop because you can't figure out how to communicate the most basic of information. I respectfully request the entirety of the board resign. And that concludes the comments.
Thank you, Jose and John. Mr. Gentleman, Paul, can we look into that 89M issue there?
Yes, as you know, Mr. Chairman, every comment that we get.
Yeah, I know. I know. I think.
But we will.
Yeah, that one in particular. Make sure we're doing the right thing there. Okay, next we'll hear from the Accessibility Advisory Committee Chair, Phil Posner. Good morning, Phil. I saw you there earlier.
Yes, I always say good morning, and maybe today just morning. It's been one of those days. September, October have been very busy months. The primary issues that the AAC reviewed were fare gate screens, floating bus stops, wayfinding, and we had a wonderful meeting with the general manager. The AAC work plan was starting to develop, as well as looking at the proposed new social equity fare policy, which might have been finalized today, but we'll see as things move forward. And we also discussed the roundtables that were run by the DOT this summer on increasing ridership back to normal and socioeconomic issues. There's a strong support for the new policy proposal that will be voted on at some point. Having listened to the discussion and the addendum, we will further discuss that at Monday's meeting, but everything is really good. The public have been very positive, as has the AAC. We have presented the new proposal to several of our organizations, including the MS Society, the American Heart Association, the Washington National Society for the Blind, and there is just tremendous support for the new proposal. What we truly want is continuation of SAFE. We all want that. And that is going on as we speak. Accessible. And by accessible, I mean both physically accessible and also financially accessible. And that is in the system. And finally, sustainable. And that has been part of the discussion that has been done. And the feeling from the community has been that WMATA is a public service. It's more than a public service for the disability elderly community. It's a lifeline. Without it, we just wither and disappear. And it's critical. And the funding of it should be to be financially stable. It's not a Fortune 500 company that needs to show a huge profit for the stockholders. It just has to stay in business. And of course, the way it stays in business is with support from the jurisdictions, from the federal government, during the summer roundtables, there was a lot of talk about public-private partnerships with local businesses, Better Business Bureau. WMATA's already doing that with Amazon, and with public service, not-for-profit organizations like the Urban League. And of course, fairs. And we are delighted that the current pilot project of flat fares and a reduced fare is being considered. And we hope that number will work out. We're hoping the number for the flat fares may be calculated based upon the fact that for Metro Access at least, everyone that uses it is either disabled or elderly or both. And so that might be something to be considered. At our Metro Access Subcommittee meeting, Mr. Wiedefeld shared a general overview of the Metro Access paratransit service, and we had a lively exchange of information and ideas. We encourage all of the board members to visit any or all of our committees and subcommittees for an exchange of information and ideas. Previously, Mr. Spedberg and Ms. Babers have attended, and last Friday, I had a wonderful session that I was invited to in a Teams meeting with Ms. Klein, Ms. Martin Proctor, and Dr. Helfer. We would love to have other members of the board participate and use us as information. Ride with us, ride with members of your jurisdiction to learn what's going on. Colonel Drummer is someone we'd love to have. He is a new member of the board from Prince George County, and you all know Prince George County has the worst service of bus and rail of all the jurisdictions and the highest use of Metro Access of all of the jurisdictions. And I'm sure he would love to have a ride with Miss Rush, our first vice chair, and walk a quarter mile to the nearest bus stop and stand in the road waiting for an hour for it to come in the rain before they take their Metro Access trip. And so we would love to have more interaction, and anytime we can help with anything that you need. This is a personal opinion based upon some of the earlier public comments. Under no circumstances should any of you, let alone all of you, resign. I think you're doing a great job considering all of the things that have been going on with COVID and the recent accidents that have taken place. And I believe very strongly that the safety level is being maintained as best that it can possibly be maintained at this level. And I say that based upon interactions with the chief safety officer, the general manager, and the chief operating officer as they have presented information to our committee. So please don't resign. Just keep doing the great job that you've been doing. And I will let you move on to the rest of the meeting. It's been a tough 2 months. And we are surviving, you are surviving, and we thank you for all that you do.
Thank you, Phil. Appreciate that. Any questions for Mr. Posner? Comments?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, of course.
Phil, thank you for your excellent report and your plea for us to be involved. I had 2 questions. One, how's your committee feel about the new access vans that I see roaming all over the place? Are they better than the old ones?
Well, the newest access vans have not come in yet, but the RFP that has been put out for purchase have met all of our requests. And so they should be a real improvement. The same is true of the sedans. Right. The sedans now have an RFP that has gone out in two parts, one for the sedan and one for up-regulation. And once again, based upon the shortfall in software and the shortage in vehicles, we have to see what actually comes in. The GM has been reaching out, as has Mr. Blake, to local dealerships to get bids and make sure that people do in fact apply for the vehicles. So we are optimistic that they will be good. But as with everything else, we are taking a wait and see process. And so when the new ones do arrive, we will be testing them out, taking rides, and we'll report back to you. But everything we have asked for and lessons learned has been delivered. And so we are absolutely delighted with that. The other thing that has happened is Mr. Blake is continuing to develop alternate options for people in the disability community to the Metro Access van, which is the sedans and flexible taxi rides that can be assigned. And we are piloting now, and that looks like it's working very well based on feedback from our Metro Access Subcommittee, including customer feedback, and of course, Mr. Simmelford, who almost lives on Metro Access van, and his experiences. I see Mr. Drummer has his hand up.
Phyllis, are the zebras behind you the ones from Prince George's County that are on the loose?
Actually, I denied any involvement, but I'm hoping that they will in fact be captured. We have a wildlife sanctuary just outside of Gainesville, and so when we are down here for part of the year, we have been given some pictures of the zebras and the buffalo and the giraffes.
Okay.
And during my time at Auburn, my department ran the Raptor Center, so we have lots of raptors and hawks.
Okay, all right. Don, you had a question, comment. Thanks, Don.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Phil, thank you for your informative updates, and I look forward to engaging with you and your team.
Well, that's terrific. And the African Queen, Miss Rush, is looking forward to meeting with you.
He's quite a force of nature, Don. You better watch out.
Denise is our ears, eyes, and voice on the street. She knows everything that's going on.
That she does. All right. Any other questions or comments? All right, seeing none. Thank you, Philip. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Next, we'll hear from our Riders Advisory Council Chair, Brian Myers. Brian.
Thank you very much. Good morning, Chairman Smedberg and fellow members of the WMATA Board of Directors. Thank you very much for having me this morning. On October 6, 2021, the RAC met during its October meeting and was joined by WMATA staff, where they presented and answered questions pertaining to the fare policy principles and some proposed fare adjustments for Metro Rail, Metro Bus, and Metro Access. After some discussion about the presentation, we unanimously agreed that the WMATA Board of Directors should indeed adopt the draft fare policy principles that are being considered. We agree that whatever fare changes, policies, or initiatives that WMATA decides to implement should consider whether said action is customer-focused, simple and convenient, equitable, seamless, and built to drive ridership. More specifically, under that last point of building to drive ridership, it is the belief of the RAC that language should be included to emphasize the need of the metro system to be competitive with alternative systems and alternative modes of transportation. With that said, recognizing the amendments made to the proposed fare policy principles at the Finance and Capital Committee meeting just this morning and the ensuing discussion and adoption of those amendments, We, as a RAC, think that those changes to the proposal encapsulates the system's need to be financially solvent and competitive with alternatives of using Metro. So thank you very much for those amendments. In our next meeting, actually it may cover a couple of meetings, we hope to discuss and make recommendations about the specific fare concepts being proposed to the Metro system, including proposals about pricing, targeted discounts, fare structures, passes, and the fare delivery systems. We also recognize that all of these discussions need to be within the context of the General Manager's FY23 budget proposal. We're looking forward to working with the board in this regard. And lastly, I just wanted to echo Phil's comments about thanking you all for the work you do to keep our system safe for all, especially over the past month or two. Thank you very much.
Appreciate it. Thank you, Brian. Any questions for Brian and the RAC? Okay, seeing none. Again, thank you, Brian. And as you know, next month, the General Manager will be releasing his proposed budget. So stay tuned.
Looking forward to it. Thank you very much.
Take care. Thank you. Next item, report by the chair. First, I want to start by saying that the General Manager, as part of his report today, will brief everyone on current service levels and derailment and the derailment investigation. We will reserve discussion on those items for his report. So next, I'd like to recognize our three federal members who recently completed their board service with us: Tony Costa, Devin Rouse, and Stephen McMillan. And I want to thank them all for being here today. First, I'd like to recognize Mr. Costa. Tony, are you with us here? Oh, there you are. How are you? I think you're on mute.
Doing well, thank you.
Well, that's good to hear. So I'm going to go ahead and read the commendation, and then we'll move approval of that, and then turn the table over for comments, and then to you, Tony. Whereas Tony Costa has faithfully represented the federal government on the Metro Board of Directors since August 2014, and whereas during his tenure on the board, Mr. Costa served on several committees, including as Vice Chair of the Governance, Capital, and Strategic Planning and Capital Program, Planning and Real Estate Committees. And whereas Mr. Costa's professional experience overseeing the planning, design, and construction of federal facilities provided the board with the necessary expertise to oversee and monitor WMATA's capital program. And whereas a well-managed capital program, including a clear overview of Metro's capital needs, help make the case for dedicated funding for Metro. And whereas Metro's joint development program benefited from Mr. Costa's in-depth knowledge of facilities planning and development. And resolved that the WMATA Board of Directors offers its sincere gratitude to Tony Costa for his service and leadership as a member of the WMATA Board of Directors. And be it further resolved that the WMATA Board of Directors commends Tony Costa for his dedication to providing the best service for Metro customers and the region. Tony, congratulations. And you were one of the longer serving members of this board. You, Kathy, a few others. So you really did your time, so to speak. And I know when I first joined the board, you were already there, obviously. And I know when I came on, we were dealing with several of those issues, and your experience and knowledge in those areas were just so key. And you raised so many good points and asked so many good questions of staff. And I really think that really did contribute greatly to not only the level of discussion, but the work product that ultimately was developed and approved. So really appreciate that. And we worked on some sticky issues together, I know, in little work groups. And again, really look to your guidance and leadership there because of your experience and the respect that people had for you. So thank you for all you've done. And it's funny, I think a lot of what you didn't get a lot of high profile, but was so valuable to the board and the organization at the time, and probably got overlooked, and that was a shame because it really was a huge contribution. So thank you very much. Before we go on, I'll open it up. I know many of you probably have never met or actually are seen Tony. But is there anyone that would like to say anything? Tom, would you like to say anything? You've served with Tony.
Yeah, I just, Mr. Chairman, just have one question for Tony. Having served with him for so long, what happened to your alma mater's football team? I mean, they really were totally ranked so high, and now they look terrible.
I have no idea. It's, maybe that'll be my next board membership to help Carolina actually have a football team. But thanks, Tom.
Yeah, all right, Tony, thank you for all the good times we had together. I appreciate it so much, particularly with my company, with some of the recommendations that you were able to give me concerning leased property in San Francisco, and that all worked out. Thank you so much for your help.
Thank you, sir. It was fun.
Yep.
Mr. Wiedefeld, you were there coming on as a new GM when Tony was on the board. Any thoughts over the last few years here?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting you say that, because one of my first meetings, as you remember, Tony, I went over to your office, as you recall, very early in the process, because of your background on the board, but more importantly for me was your background in, sort of public service and some of the things you've had to deal with. So I just appreciate the support you gave me, particularly in some of those early years when we were, going through some very difficult times. So I thank you, and also your staff. As you know, you had a really good staff support you and support us. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Paul.
Tony?
Just thanks so much. It was a great opportunity. I don't have to tell you all the work of WMATA really matters. Hundreds of thousands of people, communities, the regional economy, and of course the federal community. It was an honor to help. And Paul, you mentioned sort of being, I'm not sure I was low profile in the internal meetings, but I really like that part of it. And Paul, thanks so much about the civil service piece and the public service piece. I've been honored my whole life to be able to serve the public, and frankly, the WMATA experience, in many ways, was the most complex. And I thought I had done and been associated with complex things, and then I joined you all and realized, oh my God, and just the notion of moving so many people every day. And the importance of the operation to individuals, the economy at large, and the national government. I mean, I'm getting goosebumps. So I miss you all, mostly, and I really appreciate the thank you, and good luck in the future. I'll be right. So please, good luck.
All right. Thank you, Tony. So we have a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Bolger. I think that I hear it's unanimous. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Thank you. Chair Smedberg.
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers.
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater.
Aye.
Ms. Klein.
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn.
Aye.
Mr. Bolger.
Aye.
Mr. Drummer.
Aye.
And Ms. Martin Proctor.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Tony, it's unanimous. All right. Again, thank you. Thank you so much. Really, honestly do appreciate it. Next, we'll move on to recognize Devin Rouse. I move approval of the following commendation. Whereas Devin Rouse faithfully represented the federal government on the Metro Board of Directors from January 2019 until September 2021. And whereas Mr. Rouse served as the Vice Chair of the Safety and Operations Committee beginning in January 2021. And whereas Mr. Rouse's extensive knowledge of both railway safety and safety management systems provided invaluable assistance to the board in performing its safety oversight role. And whereas Mr. Rouse also lent his expertise to the ongoing review and transformation of Metro's Rail Operations Control Center, or ROC, now therefore be it resolved that the WMATA Board of Directors offers its sincere gratitude to Devin Rouse for his service and leadership as a member of the WMATA Board of Directors. And be it further resolved that the WMATA Board of Directors commends Devin Rouse for his dedication to ensuring that WMATA provides the safest service for its customers in the region. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Bolger and I believe Secretary Slater. So Devin, I'll just say a few words. Again, I personally cannot thank you enough for all you've done, not only for this board at such a critical time, given your expertise, but also when I called you that one day to see if you would help out with the issues we were dealing with the ROC, and bringing that independent, critical eye to that endeavor. And I know it was greatly appreciated, not only by the board, but also staff. And it was just so helpful to resolve, and again, getting down that path to resolve so many of those issues. And again, all that you brought to the table at such a critical time, I personally, and I know we can't thank you enough for all you did. And you were always so thoughtful and so level-headed and always thinking about how to make things better. So just really sincerely thank you and appreciate it so much. Is there anyone else that would like to make any comments or say anything? Raise your hand. Okay. Paul, I know you would probably like to say a few words.
Yes,
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, Devin, obviously, the support you've given us, but really, the shoulder-to-shoulder work, that you did for us was so appreciated. I know Teresa misses you greatly, as our chief safety officer, because you speak a certain language with, that you can communicate very closely with, and I know that your leader misses you as well. Again, because I think that your depth of knowledge and some of the technical side of this was so important for us to understand some of these issues and go forward. So I just want to thank you for the time you committed beyond the board work that you did for us, the time you committed to particularly to Joe and to Teresa. So thank you so much.
Certainly, Paul. Thank you, Paul. Yeah, thank you. It's definitely been a pleasure, albeit a short tenure. And, having served most of it as an alternate, it really was an even smaller window in terms of being able to be engaged. But I certainly enjoyed the work and, continued down the path you're on. Don't lose faith. I know, safety is not an easy topic. There's no quick fix. It's not about press conferences or posturing or letter writing. It really takes rolling up your sleeves and looking at things from not only the management level, but also all the way down and how plans and actions are executed down to the boots on the ground level. And that's a lot that people don't usually get to see, right? They see the big aspects, the plans, the caps, and things that we're working on, but they don't see all the work that has to go in behind that to make sure that you can execute and run a system. WMATA is over 50 years old, and it's one of the largest in the U.S. by route miles, and that's not something you can change overnight. And I think many of us have been saying this many times, and that's, there's Safe Track was a good start, but the work still needs to be done. Keep your head down and keep working on things like the ROC, addressing the issues that we were working on with the red signal pass-bys, and you got to replace that ATC system at some point. I'm sure you're looking forward to that. And it's a never-ending quest to get a safe and a reliable system. But you have done a lot of great work. You've laid a lot of good groundwork there, and continue working on it in the way that you have been.
Thank you, Devin. Okay, we have a motion and a second. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Thank you. Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers?
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater?
Aye.
Ms. Klein?
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Bulger? Mr. Bulger?
You're on mute, Tom.
Mr. Drummer,
Aye.
Ms. Martin Proctor.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Congratulations, Devin, and thank you again so much. Great seeing you.
Thanks, Paul.
All right. Next, we'll recognize Stephen McMillan. I move approval of the following. Steve, are you there? There you are. Oh, and you're wearing a tie today.
You noticed. I didn't get the memo.
I move approval of the following commendation. Whereas Steve McMillan has faithfully represented the federal government on the WMATA Board of Directors since July 2017. And whereas Mr. McMillan served as the chair of the board's capital program, planning, and real estate committee, and as both the vice chair and chair of the finance and capital committee, along with serving as the federal member on the board's executive committee. Whereas Mr. McMillan chaired the Finance and Capital Committee during an unprecedented disruption to the transit industry brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic. And whereas Mr. McMillan worked to ensure that Metro balanced its competing needs of continuing to provide service to its customers during the pandemic while remaining fiscally responsible in the face of significantly reduced service. Whereas, as chair of the Finance and Capital Committee, Mr. McMillan worked diligently to establish consensus among members to address issues of funding and resource allocation. And whereas during his tenure as Finance and Capital Committee chair, the board approved one of the most significant and rider-focused changes to Metro's fare structure. Now therefore be it resolved that the WMATA Board of Directors offers its sincere gratitude to Steve McMillan for his service and leadership as a member of the WMATA Board of Directors, and be it further resolved that the WMATA Board of Directors commends Steve McMillan for his dedication to providing the best service for WMATA customers in the region. Is there a second?
Second.
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Bolger. Steve, again, I'm going to sound like a broken record here this morning, but honestly, your knowledge and expertise, experience, and level-headedness at such a critical time were so valuable, not only to the board and WMATA, but also to our regional partners as they work through things as well. And I personally, and I know everyone that commented about your leadership over, when you chaired that committee. And even before that, just the questions you asked, the engagement, the thoughtful engagement you had with staff was also greatly appreciated. And again, it helped us be better as a body. I think it pushed staff in a good way. And, we worked through some really tough issues under your leadership. And again, a lot of the work that chairs does get overlooked a lot of times, but I just personally want to thank you for all you did in that role, and all the the ideas and the leadership that you brought forward, because it really was critical. And I know many people appreciated it very much. So thank you. Anyone else like to say anything? Secretary Slater?
Paul, just want to say thank you to Steve. I know when I came into this position and went to the WMATA board and went to the finance committee, the WMATA budget is pretty complex, and you helped me kind of dive into that and understand that. So just want to thank you for your leadership and really guidance to me as I was trying to tackle joining this board. So thank you. And really thank you to all the members who served. Public service is a real privilege, and all of you stepped up when we needed you to.
Thank you, Greg. Mr. Bolger.
Steve, you did a great job under a lot of circumstances given the past administration. I really appreciate your leadership and with your steady hand, and I'll miss you a lot. Thank you, Steve.
Ms. Klein.
Yeah, I didn't have the opportunity to work directly with Steve as others have, but I just wanted to note that he made himself available to help the new members transition into this role to answer any questions that we had. And transitions are never easy. And I really appreciated him making himself available for that. Answering our questions really helped to kind of smooth our entry onto the board. So thank you very much for that, Steve.
Mr. Wiedefeld?
Yeah, Steve, thank you. I want to thank you on behalf of Tom and Dennis, who you work with very closely. I mean, I know they miss you. Your understanding of capital programming, your understanding of operating, budgets and the pressures that's under, and then your knowledge of the federal government and how that whole process worked, I think helped our government liaison office as well. So I think it was, a full team approach that you brought to us. So I really appreciate that. And then personally, obviously, you offered me some very good counsel along the way. So thank you so much.
And Paul, that's a really good point. Steve, your help, we worked through issues together. We were on a little working group with our IG, but then also your expertise when you worked at the White House and your senior position on Capitol Hill on the Senate side, Senate Finance Committee, all those connections really did help us at a very, very critical time. So thank you, Paul, for raising that. Okay, Ms. Ellison, please conduct the vote, and then we'll turn it over to you, Steve.
Okay. Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers?
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater?
Aye.
Ms. Klein?
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Bulger?
Aye.
Mr. Drummer?
Aye.
Ms. Martin Proctor?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen?
Always good to see how the vote comes out first before you make it. Thanks everybody for those kind words. I was surprised when I was asked to join the WMATA board back in 2017, and my guess is some other people probably were as well. But it turned out to be fascinating and rewarding, and I'm grateful for every day of the experience. In the time I've been here, WMATA's made tremendous progress addressing longstanding financial, operational, and other issues. And there's certainly more work to be done. New challenges arising almost daily. The issues you guys are facing now as a board. It's a mix of some of the things I was dealing with for 4 years and some things I'd never even heard of yet. So, but I do have enormous respect for the team that's taking those on. I want to in particular thank Paul Wiedefeld for his wisdom and courage and dedication in leading this organization. You're a rare public administrator, and WMATA's lucky to have you. Mr. Chairman, I miss our yellow line rides back when these meetings were in person, and I also appreciate the calm, cool leadership you brought to the board, keeping everyone focused on the task at hand. And lastly, I want to make sure that I don't forget how I got this opportunity. I want to thank Secretary Chow, Deputy Secretary Rosen for selecting me back in 2017. And I also want to thank Secretary Buttigieg and his team for trusting me to represent the federal government while they searched for their replacements. I'll miss all my fellow board members and the staff, and to the new federal directors, I wish you well. Hope your 10 years is as fulfilling as mine was. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And again, Tony, Devin, and Steve, thank you so much. Your service was greatly appreciated, and you can all look back proudly on that time, because you all, in your unique way, did provide a lot of thought and had successes in everything you did. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
All right, take care. And lastly, as a reminder for November, our committee and board meetings will take place on the 1st and 3rd Thursdays, November 4th, which is next week, and the 18th. So please mark your calendar for those of you joining us here today who attend these meetings. And obviously notices will go out. The general manager will be presenting his proposed fiscal year 2023 budget next week during during that meeting. So this concludes my report, and now I'll turn the floor over to the general manager, Paul Wiedefeld, for his report. Mr. Wiedefeld.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And yes, I did want to bring everyone up to date on the 7,000 series. So I want to give an overview of our efforts to provide more service to our customers and what levels of service they can expect in the foreseeable future. I will then have Joe Leader, our COO, give a more detailed service update, and our safety officer, Teresa, an update on the investigation process to date. Since the 7,000 series cars were pulled from service, our immediate focus has been on two efforts to return additional cars to service. The first effort is to bring older cars back into service, specifically the legacy trains, the 2s, the 3s, and the 6,000 series cars. The second effort has been to develop a wheel inspection plan for the 7,000 series cars that ensures they are safely returned to service. Regarding the first effort, all the 2s and 3 series cars, which had been idle for months during the pandemic, must have all maintenance requirements performed prior to reintroducing them back into service. In the case of the 6,000 series trains, the revised coupler system that was identified several months ago must be installed. And all the cars must meet safety inspection standards prior to being put back into service. To make service more frequent and reduce crowding at the certain times, we have to grow from the existing supply of the legacy fleet from 31 trains daily to 50 trains daily. This will take some time, and I want to thank our men and women in car maintenance who are working around the clock to bring those cars back into service as quickly as possible. Regarding the second effort to restore the 7Ks to service, the 7,000 series to service, we need to successfully test parameters of a new wheel inspection process. To ensure the test is solid and that we can count on the results before we start returning those trains to service, we're working closely with the WMSC, the Safety Commission, to ensure the thoroughness of the plan. Once that test plan is accepted, we will then need at least 2 weeks to complete the test, which will then inform the restoration plan of bringing the 7,000 series back into revenue service. So today we can say that the train service that will remain as it is today, 15 minutes on the red line and 30 minutes on all the lines from November 1st through November 15th. And next Friday, I will give another 2-week look ahead. Again, we are working as hard as we can to get that legacy fleet back out there, but it takes time, as you can imagine. I know that Joe will go further into that. So now let me turn it over to Joe to give more details about the service and some of the plans that they have on the service side, on the operation side, and then Teresa will fill us in on what's going on both in terms of the process related to the NTSB investigation. So Joe, if you could start us off, please.
Okay, Teresa, if you could advance the slide. Thank you. My name is Joseph Leader. I'm the Chief Operating Officer here at Washington Metro. I would first like to start by apologizing to our Metro Rail riders and inform them and the board all our resources are working to get all of our 2,000, 3,000, and 6,000 series rail cars back in service. This week, our focus has been towards continuing the investigation alongside all parties, including the NTSB and the WMSC, maintaining the service we announced on October 19th and making that service more reliable. And we continue to bring more 2,000, 3,000, and 6,000 series rail cars back to service each and every day. Early in the pandemic, as service was reduced, the majority of our service was provided by the 6,000 and the 7,000 series rail cars. Once the 6,000 series rail cars were grounded as a result of a second pull apart, some 3,000 series rail cars were put back in service. However, the majority of the 3,000 and all of the 2,000 series remained in cold storage. In order to put the 2,000 series rail cars back in service, a series of component changeouts need to be performed, followed by a thorough inspection and cleaning. Then the deuces are coupled together, making a 6-car consist. It sounds easy, but with limited yard tracks and shop availability, the overall task will take some time. In terms of service now and in the near future, we are looking at multiple phases. Currently in phase 1A, this is what we call basic service. Basic service was announced on Tuesday, October 19th. It calls for 31 6-car trains. That is the minimum required to operate this current schedule we are on, with no gap trains or spares. We reached this milestone on Wednesday, October 20th. In terms of service, the red line runs every 15 to 20 minutes. On all other lines, we run 30 to 40 minutes. And also, the Silver Line service only operates between Wheeling-Reston and Federal Center, Southwest. In Phase 1B, that is basic service with targeted improvements, and that is what we are looking to move into next week. Scheduled headways will remain the same on all lines as in Phase 1A. However, additional trains, as they become available, will be strategically used to address the most crowded areas and improve reliability of basic service. As an example, placing additional trains in service strategically on the Green Line. In the Phase 1A basic service schedule, the busiest trains each day exceeded 90 people per passenger rail car. Tripper trains have been added in the 7 a.m. and 5 p.m. hours. Running the trippers has brought crowding below 60 passengers per car. It should be noted at pandemic times, an overcrowded car was considered 100 or a little bit more than 100 passengers per rail car. We are not seeing these numbers here, but we are monitoring those numbers every day. Each day, we will continue prioritizing strategic deployment of trains ready to enter service to reduce crowding. On the red line, to maintain consistent peak service, we will add additional gap trains to assist in maintaining reliability. And for the Green Line, where crowding is being felt, we will be adding additional or extra trippers. And finally, we want to extend the Silver Line to Largo, which will add additional service out to Largo, but will also help us improve performance in the core, because we're turning trains at Federal Center, and that does hurt performance. And finally, in Phase 2, we want to increase frequency. Once sufficient trains are available, schedules will be updated to increase service frequencies all day. For this service, a total of 44 trains are needed to implement all service improvements of Phase 2 with an appropriate number of gap trains. We anticipate that the red line would improve. Headways would be 12 to 15 minutes. On the Green Line, headways would be 20 to 30 minutes. And on the blue, orange, silver, green, and yellow lines in the core, we would see 10 to 15-minute headways. And as we get more and more rail cars, we will begin to increase from 6-car trains to 8-car trains, and that will also help with some overcrowding. Teresa, could I have the next slide? This slide provides an example of the ridership data Metro planners are using to develop these plans. Charts on the slide show the average crowding at each stop in the core on the red and green lines in peak directions. Averages are broken down by hour, and we use smart trip data and train movement to estimate the average passengers per rail car. Boxes colored with deep red reflect the average crowding above 75 people per car, which also means that we have standing room only conditions. On the red line heading towards Glenmont, the highest crowding is seen in the 5 p.m. hour, especially between Metro Center and Judiciary Square. On the Green Line heading towards Branch Avenue, the highest crowding is also in the 5 p.m. hour, especially between LaFont and Waterfront stations. And these are examples of where we are strategically inserting extra tripper trains to address any crowding issues we are finding. And at this time, I would pass the presentation over to Teresa, who will report out on the effects of the investigations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Leader. Just to briefly review some of the initial response activities, in train 407, the operator initially reported a stuck holding brake on rail car 7200 and approach to Arlington Cemetery, track 2. Arlington County Fire Department arrived on the scene and assisted with the customer evacuation to Arlington Cemetery, which was an approximate 2,000-foot walk via the track bed. 187 customers were evacuated from the train with no injuries reported, and 1 customer transported for a precautionary medical evaluation. WMATA made notifications to the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission and the Department of Transportation's Operations Center. At this point in the investigative process, we're working with the NTSB as a party. The NTSB is currently in their on-site fact-finding and data collection phase. We'll be continuing to work with the NTSB as they visit WMATA's shops and facilities, as well as our field locations to continue to collect that data. Parties to the investigation at this point include WMATA, the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission, our labor unions, the FTA, Kawasaki, the original equipment manufacturer, and ORX, the equipment manufacturer's vendor. I'd like to briefly review a little bit of information with regard to the truck system on the 7000 series train sets, otherwise known as a bogie. Each train car has two trucks that are located near the ends of the cars, which support the mass of the vehicle and use the wheels to guide it along the track and provide a degree of cushioning against shocks transmitted from the track during motion via a suspension system. A pair of train set wheels is rigidly fixed to an axle to form a wheel set. The wheels are pressed onto the axle so that they both rotate together. Two wheel sets are mounted in each truck, which is mounted under the rail car to support and guide the car along the tracks. When the wheel sets function as designed, components of the wheel sets should not move laterally. The distance from flange to flange in the wheel sets, as depicted in the graphic on the lower right corner of the screen, is known as a back-to-back measurement. This measurement is taken at 90-day intervals in our normal inspection process to ensure that the wheels have not migrated. WMATA's equipment inspection process is derived from industry standards and the equipment manufacturer's instructions. The scope of our equipment inspection process includes both safety critical systems and non-safety critical systems. An example of a safety critical system would be a train's braking system or structural components. An example of a non-safety critical system would be something like a passenger information display system on the train. WMATA has multiple intervals for equipment inspection. They include daily pre-trip inspections, 30, 90, and 180-day inspections, as well as annual inspections. Each of these inspections occurs at a prescribed interval based upon the equipment manufacturer's recommendations for appropriate inspection intervals. Actions that are taken with regard to the inspections include monitoring of conditions, restricting the equipment, or complete removal from service. WMATA has taken all of these actions throughout the history of maintaining our fleet. For example, monitoring actions would be tracking the amount of consumables that a system may use. Restrictions may be placing the car within a certain position within a consist or limiting the speed at which a train can operate. Removal from service is the prescribed requirement for a failure of any safety critical system that is detected. WMATA is working to enhance our process for securing non-conforming equipment when it's identified in order to assure removal from service actions take place. The photo depicted on the right-hand side of the screen shows a measurement of the back-to-back. You can see that there is a gauge marked as A, which is a manual gauge that is adjusted and fit between the wheel sets to determine that the appropriate measurements are in place with regard to the distance between wheels. With regard to our next steps, WMATA is continuing to support the investigation through our subject matter experts. We are working to send affected wheel sets to an independent third party for examination. We're working closely with the WMSC and NTSB on that front. We're also working with the car manufacturer to complete an analysis of existing failures. All of this will inform our draft mitigation plan, which is currently under development. As Mr. Wiedefeld mentioned, this mitigation plan includes a test plan, which will inform and support a rigorous inspection program for the fleet to return to service, as well as the aforementioned enhanced process for securing non-compliant equipment. Additionally, we're working to grow and expand and enhance our processes for reliability and quality management. These are initial actions that WMATA is taking while the investigation proceeds. As more information becomes known and additional recommendations come into play, WMATA will act rapidly to implement enhancements and changes to our efforts and practices. With that, Mr. Leader and I are happy to answer any questions the board may have.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Impastato. Thank you, Mr. Leader. I'm going to ask two quick questions, and then I'll turn it over to Mr. Drummer, who chairs the Safety Committee. Mr. Wiedefeld, I've heard from, I can't tell you how many stakeholders and interested parties about this incident the last week or so. And every single one of them says they find it very hard to believe, given your track record and what you've done for this organization, that if you knew about this, that you wouldn't have done something. So I guess the question they always ask me, all but one actually, did you know?
No, I did not.
Okay, thank you. And then also I have a follow-up question to that. Do we have enough, or maybe you or Ms. Impastato at this point, do we have enough information yet to know where the accountability lies for this?
I think it's too soon. I think that we let the investigation take its course, and we will deal with those issues. But I think it's the right thing to do to let the investigation run its course, and that will lead us to wherever it leads us.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Drummer.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Wiedefeld, thank you very much, and Ms. Impastato, for the work you're doing in sharing information and ensuring that everyone that needs to be informed is informed, and also the work you're doing in recognizing your workforce. This is a very complex process. We get it. And we are very eager to hear a lot of the details in the long run, but we also respect the process. So I will share with you that we want to learn as much as we can, and we will continue to do that on this committee, but we'll also respect the process. But we have tremendous confidence in what you're doing and how you're doing it. And we would ask you just continue to do that and keep us informed.
Will do, sir.
Thank you, Don. I see Mr. Bolger, followed by Secretary Slater. Mr. Bolger.
Thanks for the update, which is similar to the past updates. I have two questions. I was unable to make the executive committee meeting last Wednesday because I had a doctor's appointment. Where are we on hiring an outside consulting entity to help us understand all of this?
Yeah, Tom, I'm gathering names, and hopefully we'll be able to move on something pretty soon.
Okay, second question.
I'm not gonna wait till January or February.
Okay.
Need someone on board soon.
Okay, my second question, Mr. Chairman, is directed at Paul, if appropriate. Who came up with the $21 rebate for the people who got offloaded at the Pentagon? And it seems to me that that's somewhat insulting. What was the rationale for that?
Yeah, generally, Mr. Bolger, whenever we have a delay, we give a refund for the delay. It was an average, fare for a week. That's what it was. It was just a gesture, and it's one that we've done in the past for other delays, and that's what it was based on.
Paul, I just don't get it. Having people walk like 10 football fields for $21 doesn't make any sense to me.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Secretary Slater.
Morning, thank you, Mr. Chair. Let me start kind of on the operational side today. Maybe a question for Mr. Leader on kind of the overcrowding. Are we? I saw kind of the graphics on kind of the stations where we're seeing. Are we seeing them in normal peak times, or are we seeing them in different times of the day? That kind of thing.
Sorry, I was on mute. We're seeing some crowding in the peak for a very short period of time. The two lines that are affected is the red line, and we're seeing that around the 5 p.m. hour. And on the green line, we're seeing it at in the 7 a.m. hour and the 5 p.m. hour. So that's where we are taking our gap trains or extra tripper trains and inserting them to reduce the passenger loading on the 6-car trains.
Okay, thank you. And then maybe two questions for Ms. Depistato. One, more probably process. I'm trying to kind of where my head is, just trying to understand exactly kind of where we are moving forward. But as part of the investigation, do they look at that from kind of start to finish, like the beginning of the incident? I think what I'm trying to understand is, do they also look at kind of the ROC response to the incident as part of the investigation?
Yes, they do. Currently, the way the investigation is structured, there are multiple working groups. One of those working groups is dedicated to the emergency response. Another is dedicated to operations. Both of those working groups will look very closely at the communications process and the implementation of Metro's processes, what was done on scene in immediate response to the incident, how the ROC functioned with regard to contacting emergency responders, were there any concerns, were there any issues. They'll also work closely with the emergency responders to gain additional factual information from them.
Great, thank you. And then probably more on the technical side, trying to understand kind of organizational process as well. So the normal inspection process, the group that's responsible for that, compared to the inspection process that we're going through as part of our response, is this the same group, or are other groups involved, or you're just trying to understand those two comparatively?
Sure. So the current inspection process is established, reviewed, and approved by our standard bearing organization and Railcar Engineering, which reports to the Chief Mechanical Officer's direct report. The Railcar Maintenance team performs those inspections, and there is an internal quality team that performs quality checks on the performance of those inspections. Those same three groups are currently engaged in the investigation as members of the working groups, as well as tasked with performing special inspections post the initiation of the investigation. We also are working with additional third parties to overlay on top of our existing processes. Metro's quality improvement team, which is an independent reporting group, as well as our reliability team, which reports independently of the Office of the Chief Mechanical Officer. The safety team and third-party external authorities are all engaged and involved in overseeing the process now for the special inspections, as well as the implementation of the eventual plan moving forward for special inspections and maintenance practices to restore the 7000 series to service.
Teresa, if I could just add to Mr. Slater's question, we're hiring 2 outside consultants. One is on right now. That outside consultant will be specifically responsible for overseeing the measurements once the 7Ks go back in service. So those readings, so they'll be on site in the 3 inspection shops. The other consultant will be helping with the investigation.
Great, thank you. No, and kind of that gets to kind of where I'm thinking is, what are the checks and balances? Is there an auditing process? Those types of things. But thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chair, from me.
Thank you, Secretary Slater. Ms. Klein, followed by Mr. Alcorn.
Thank you. Thanks for that helpful briefing. I just have a couple of questions. First, for Mr. Leader, can you say a little more about tripper trains? I don't know if that is a term that is generally known among riders, what that is, and why those trains might be reserved for that special service as opposed to being deployed along the entire system. You're on mute.
You're on mute, Joe.
Sorry, I apologize. Even before this accident, when we write a schedule, what we try and do is identify the number of trains you need to run that schedule. And then we try and put extra trains, as we call gap trains or tripper trains, so that when we have a failure or a defect or a delay in service, we can insert them, okay, to try and make up, instead of having the passenger work or wait a double headway. That's what we try and do. So we call them tripper trains, we call them gap trains. So right now, like today, we have 32 trains that are running the actual service, and we have 3 additional gap trains strategically placed on the line, in a pocket track. If there's a delay, we can insert them right away.
Great, thank you very much. My other question is for Ms. Impastato. I think one of the things that people have been wondering about is kind of why the inspections are taking so long. Even in the public comment today, there was sort of a question about why it can't just sort of be done overnight and then put into service in the morning. Can you say a little bit more about what's involved in inspecting the wheel sets? Because I understand that it's not as simple as you just go to where the train set is and whip out a ruler and measure it. There's more to it than that. So can you describe that process a little?
Absolutely. So the train sets, in order to be inspected, the undercars are required to be cleaned first. The purpose of cleaning is to remove any debris or any accumulation of dirt or other particulate matter, and that'll enable the inspector to see clearly any potential damages, markings, as well as to observe any types of leaks. So in order to perform an adequate undercar inspection, first a cleaning must take place. Then the cars must be manipulated within our shop facilities to be over an inspection pit. We do have a limited number of inspection pits, so moving the cars back and forth over the inspection pits requires some logistical sorting. Once the cars are over the inspection pits, there is a detailed checklist of specific actions, observations, measurements, and additional tests that are performed. Specific to the back-to-back measurements, there are measurements that are taken, as you see, with the gauge noted right here, as well as additional measurements that are taken at the journal bearing location right here. There are additional measurements that are taken. The process for performing those measurements is detailed, and it takes a significant amount of time for inspectors to perform each step of the process and adequately document it.
Great, thank you very much. That's all the questions I have at this time.
Thank you, Sarah. Mr. Alcorn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A question on the next step slide, I think for Mr. Wiedefeld. You know, one of the things that's not there was a communications bullet. I think, you know, in terms of how are we communicating this, and I know we have constraints with the NTSB investigation ongoing, but also how does our communication strategy square with what we're trying to do to get people back on the rails, you know, from the pandemic? I think it's really important that we put forward a coherent, transparent, and comprehensive communication strategy so that our riders and our customers will know what's going on. And frankly, I think it's going to be really critical for our credibility. So, Mr. Wiedefeld, if you could address that.
Sure. We've started daily briefings on basically the two core issues. Where are we on the number of cars and the service and the quality of the service? And then where are we on the getting the 7Ks back into service? So that we're doing that daily as a press event. And then also we send it out formally to all the stakeholders so that, you know, wherever they are in the region, they know what the latest is. We don't go, as Teresa said, and as you all know, we don't go into the NTSB investigation portion very far, just anything that's public that they approve. Again, that takes their time. But what we found, and I think the chairman said it earlier, is people just want to know when's the service, you know, when can I get higher quality service? And so that's what we will be doing daily, is showing exactly where we are, and to be frank with people, to be, you know, just frank with them where we are with the number of cars we have, the time frame. That's what I've just said. That's why where we are today is where we're going to be through November 15th. Just when I look at the data, yes, we'll get more gap trains out there, but to increase the headways, literally we do not have the cars to do that. The people are working to get them out there as quickly as possible. At the same time, on the other initiative is to get that testing plan underway, but we've got to make sure that's done right. We want to make sure that we're testing the right things, that we're all in agreement that gives us the best safety result that we need to put those cars out. So that's we do not want to put a date out there for that. That's going to be ready when it's safe. So that's what we are, you know, we're communicating daily where we're on both of those fronts, because those are the two most important fronts that people want to hear about.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Wiedefeld. Let's also make sure that our communications regarding pandemic and getting back on the rails is, especially when we're talking about some crowding on trains.
Right.
Let's make sure that we got that in mind, and also perhaps this is an opportunity for maybe us to do some more things on rider feedback and maybe try some new things communication wise, because I know that's been an ongoing challenge for some of our riders anyway. So thank you.
Good point.
Thank you, Walter. Ms. Babers.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of questions. So I know that we heard that the bus manager was looking at whether or not you all needed assistance from jurisdictions who I guess were offering assistance. We haven't heard anything else about that. Is that still something that is being looked at?
It is, Joe. I don't know if there's anything specific that the bus has done, but basically what we've heard from the local support from the different jurisdictions is there's anything they could do to basically either if there's a mirror service for a little bit of a rail trip that they would alter their routes. Same way with us, but our bus ridership has continued to grow, and that started since the last few months actually. So that's a good sign, that is starting to come back. The rail service that we've seen has been steady now for 2 weeks. It did drop, but it's steady now. So we will continue to work. If there's any, it'll be more on the tweaking side though, to be frank, because as you know, our system's out there to serve lots of people on the bus side. So you can't pull from one neighborhood to another neighborhood. So that's the challenge we face, and we're using all of our equipment and all of our people to do that today.
Right. Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to know, was that still being discussed? And then when it comes to bringing back series 2 and 3 trains, I know I'm going to get this question. What is the major difference, I guess, between 2 and 3 versus 6 and 7? Is it just cosmetic and comfort, but there is no concern about coupling a series 2 with a 6, or do you really have to do a whole train?
No, yeah, we won't be doing that. I mean, Joe can talk a little bit more, but the general response is the 2s were not as reliable historically, right, as the 7s and the 6s. So that's why we started to move them out of the fleet as we had those vehicles available. So basically, that just means we got to maintain them. We got to keep a very close eye on them while maintaining. So that's the issue. So it's not the best product we have, right? But it is what we have in the, it's what we have in the closet right now. So we got to pull it out and use it.
Okay. And then actually one more question. I had and this maybe is more to the board versus to you, Paul. I had sent a question and said, should we look at whether or not we should do any type of service recovery while we continue to offer reduced service? Like clearly we are not offering peak service during peak times, but yet we're still charging peak fares, are we not?
Yes.
So the question is, should we still be charging peak fares?
And that is a, that's a policy issue.
That's a board question, yes.
And Lucinda, as we said earlier, that the general manager will be releasing that budget, but I think as we gather more information here and see what's happening, I think it's probably something that will likely be on the table. We'll see. And we have heard that suggestion from some customers, or I have anyway, and then a stakeholder or two has mentioned that also.
Right. Well, Paul, hopefully when the general manager releases his budget, we are back to full service.
Yeah.
So what I'm talking about is
Oh, no, I understand. I understand what you're talking
about. Okay. All right. Yeah. Okay. Because of course, I think we have said, want to know what is the board doing. And I know we're hiring our consultant, and but we need to look at what else is the board doing to try to assist during this time. And now, Paul, I'm back to you. I am quite sure that as you all are doing all these inspections and all these maintenance and inspections to get this series 2 and 3 back on track, you all are, I am sure, blowing the overtime budget as it relates to maintenance employees and employees who do inspection. So I think we're going to already see a hit to the budget, and WMATA is going to have to go back in and account for these several weeks of unexpected costs. So
We will see. We will see, because a lot of those people would have been doing regular maintenance on the 7000s, but since we're not running those, so again, so it's not. We'll work through that and see what it comes out. But just so you know, there's some savings because we're not moving 60% of the fleet. So there's there's a little push and pull there, just so you're aware.
Okay, so some trade-offs. Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you, Chairman. That's all I had.
Thank you, Lucinda. Mr. Bolger.
This is sort of a general question that I've been asked. When does the NTSB have to tell the public they're going to finish their investigation, or is it continuous forever, or is there a deadline?
From a statutory perspective, there's no regulation in place that caps the amount of time that an NTSB investigation takes. NTSB's normal practice is to scale their investigations commensurate with the complexity of the incident or accident. It's not uncommon for full NTSB investigations to span up to 24 months from the date of the incident through the final adoption of the report. But the NTSB does have a number of specific milestones within their process where they'll release additional information as it becomes known throughout their investigation. At this point, it'd be difficult for us to predict how long each phase of the investigation will take. But we are working very closely with them.
Mr. Chairman, I have one more question, if I may ask Paul. Paul mentioned that we're working round the clock. Based on Lucinda's question on inspection, does that mean 24/7, or does that mean 2 shifts, or what?
No, that means 24/7, which again, we work that way all the time, as you know, because normally if we're in revenue service, when these things come in after revenue, that's when we do a lot of the work. So I was just saying that our people are working very hard to get this, to do all this. That's all. I just wanted to thank them for their work. But yeah, so that is fairly standard, Mr. Bolger.
Thank you.
Paul, I have a question, picking up on something Walter mentioned, building rider confidence again. So the Washington Metropolitan Safety Commission reported that there were 2 wheel sets that went out, or 2 wheels, I guess, that went out last week that failed even after the inspection. So what steps is WMATA or Metro taking to address that in hopes that, we can get as many 7,000 series cars back online? What steps are you taking? I'm not sure whom should answer that, so I'll let you.
No, I will at a high level first, and Joe can add more, but I'm not going to comment on that because that is part of the investigation. So I'm not going to go anywhere further on that issue in terms of what happened. In terms of what's being done, basically the bottom line is that in effect, we're literally where you would operate the car. It is inoperable in effect, and it has to be, a supervisor has to be there even to move the car. And there's a series of other things that we put up physically to prevent that car from being moved and to be, in effect, quarantined. But remember, these cars do have to be moved around in a yard because you got a fleet that's coming and going, so you can quarantine some in a reserved area, but others you may have to move. So they may move in the yard, and the order from the MSC is for non-revenue movement of the 7,000s. Okay. Meaning non-revenue service. Right. But basically, to put them back into service of revenue, they would have to go through this process.
Okay. All right.
Paul, if I could just add, the prior procedure, we had a software program where if the train or the consist was deemed to be non-revenue, it was color coded a certain way. What we've done is gone to more of a lockout tag out procedure where we put red flags around. Once we bring it back out of the shop into the storage tracks, we put red flags up. We put a sign on the glass, and we also have a lockout tag out that is attached to the master controller. So if an operator walked in there, they would see that this is out of service, and they would need a supervisor from car equipment to come, remove the tag, and allow them to put it back in service. So we've tightened up our procedures using the lockout tag out type procedures.
All right. Okay, not seeing any other hands. Joe, Teresa, thank you so much. Appreciate it. Any closing comments, Paul, before you?
No, I mean, we will give an update tomorrow on any service changes and daily. So thank you.
Yeah. And also too, I think people should know, Paul, you've been reaching out, and you and I together at times have been reaching out to stakeholders, giving them, updates as appropriate, so people should be aware of that. All right. Anything else, Paul? Is that it?
No, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. All right. Next, we'll move on to the Operations and Safety Committee report. Chairman Drummer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There was one item referred to the board from the Safety and Operations Committee in our October 14th meeting. Staff sought approval of an update to Metro's Agency Safety Plan, or ASP. The ASP is updated annually and describes how Metro will implement its safety management system in accordance with federal regulations. If approved by the board, the ASP will be submitted to the Washington Metro Rail Safety Commission for approval. Mr. Chairman, I move for approval.
Thank you, Mr. Drummer. So there's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Bolger. Is there any discussion? If you would raise your hand. Okay, seeing none. Ms. Ellison.
Paul,
Tom? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Sorry, Paul, I just had one
That's all right.
question for Mr. Drummer. Given all this latest stuff, Chairman Drummer, that we're talking about just today and in the past, are there additional safety procedures that we should consider adopting as we go through this investigation process?
I'll make comment and then pass it back to Joe or Ms. Impastato. The safety management system is just that. It's a system, and it's a set of procedures and processes that give you some discipline and some focus. And some of the details about some of the things we may be concerned about will surface when you implement a system. And I will tell you, I've read this through and through, and it is exceptional. And of course, every year they have an opportunity to improve. So I'll go from there, and I'll turn it over to Joe or Ms. Impastato.
Thank you, sir. With regard to the agency safety plan, implementing the agency safety plan will have a direct influence on policy and procedure throughout Metro, many items of which will be the focus of this investigation. We will have an opportunity, should we discover throughout the course of the investigation that we can improve our processes, to further edit and expand our safety management system. But it is my personal belief that the agency safety plan as written and as will be implemented over the coming year will continue to lay the foundation for effective proactive risk management without the need for additions at this point. Again, holding in abeyance any additional discoveries throughout the investigation.
Okay, thank you for updating us on given where we are at with this plan. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Tom. Anyone else? Okay, Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Thank you. Chair Smedberg?
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers?
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater?
Aye.
Ms. Klein?
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn?
Aye.
Mr. Bulger?
Aye.
Mr. Drummer?
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. And I'll note, Ms. Camila Martin Proctor had to leave the meeting, and so that's why I didn't call on her this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Mr. Drummer, I believe that's the end of your report. Is that correct? Yep.
Yes, that does complete our report. Thank you.
All right, thanks so much. Next, we'll move on to the report by the Finance and Capital Committee. Vice Chair Slater.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The following items were referred to the board by the Finance and Capital Committee. First, the Tenley Town Joint Development Agreement. Staff sought approval to execute a joint development agreement for the sale of an 11,000 square foot housing chiller plant serving the Tenley Town and the Friendship Heights Metro Rail stations. The chiller plant will be relocated on site by the purchaser, and the agreement will allow Metro access to the site to support its operations. Mr. Chair, I move approval.
Thank you, Secretary Slater. We have a motion on the table. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Mr. Alcorn. Any discussion or questions on this? Okay. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers,
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater,
Aye.
Ms. Klein,
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Mr. Bulger,
Aye.
and Mr. Drummer.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. Our next item, Secretary Slater.
Good morning. Next item involves the approval of the Crystal City Public Hearing Staff Report and amendment to the Mass Transit Plan for new station entrance. Staff sought approval of the Public Hearing Staff Report and an amendment to the Mass Transit Plan to add an east entrance to the Crystal City Metro Rail Station in the vicinity of 18th Street and Crystal Drive in Arlington, Virginia. Mr. Chair, I move approval.
Okay, thank you, Secretary Slater. We have a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Babers. Any
Chairman?
discussion on this item, Mr. Drummer?
Mr.
Oh,
Chairman.
Mr. Alcorn, sorry.
Yeah, I should probably recuse myself on this motion. My employer, I work for the Consumer Technology Association, and they own property fairly close to this proposed entrance, not immediately, so I'm going to declare myself recused on this.
Ms. Ellison? Is that
Noted. Thank you. We'll note that for the record. Thank you.
okay? And that suffices.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. All right, please call the roll.
Actually, I will ask Mr. Alcorn if you could just turn your camera off for a moment. Thank you. It's like stepping away from the table. We appreciate it.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Great. Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers,
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater,
Aye.
Ms. Klein,
Aye.
Mr. Bulger,
Aye.
and Mr. Drummer.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. And Secretary Slater, our last item.
Thank you. Final item involves the updated fare policy principles. Staff sought approval of an updated fare policy principles. At this morning's meeting, the committee revised the fare policy principles proposed by staff to amend the fifth principle, built to drive ridership, and add a sixth principle, generate revenue to maintain financial and service stability. Since those changes were made this morning, they are not reflected in the material before you. Mr. Chairman, I move approval of the fare policy principles as approved at this morning's Finance and Capital Committee meeting. That concludes my report.
Thank you. So there's a motion on the table. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Ms. Babers. Is there any discussion, further discussion? Okay, hearing none. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers,
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater,
Aye.
Ms. Klein,
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Mr. Bulger,
Aye.
and Mr. Drummer.
Aye.
Thank you. The motion passes.
Thank you, Ms. Ellison. And thank you, Secretary Slater. Next, we move on to our consent items. We have 3 items on the board's consent agenda today. I'd like to move approval of the following. First, authorization for public hearing on East Falls Church bus bays. Staff seeks authorization to hold a public hearing on proposed changes to the bus bays, pedestrian access, and ADA parking at the East Falls Church Metro Station. This project is funded by Arlington County. Second, sale of excess property at 4929 College Avenue, College Park, Maryland. Staff seeks approval to execute a sale of excess property at 4928 College Avenue in College Park, Maryland, for a price that exceeds $1 million. Ms. Ellison, before we move on, I see the two different addresses there, numbers for the address. Do we need to clarify that? I see 4929 and I see 4928.
It's 4928. I think that was a typo.
Yes, 4928. Thank you. It's a typo.
All right, thank you. So please note that change. And then lastly, approval of a project agreement for additional entrance for additional entrance at McLean Station. Staff seeks authorization for the general manager's designee to execute a reimbursable project agreement for Fairfax County to fully fund and Metro to construct a north entrance at the McLean Metro Rail Station. Want to move approval of those? Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Mr. Alcorn. Ms. Ellison, please call the roll.
Chair Smedberg,
Aye.
Vice Chair Babers,
Aye.
Vice Chair Slater,
Aye.
Ms. Klein,
Aye.
Mr. Alcorn,
Aye.
Mr. Bulger,
Aye.
and Mr. Drummer.
Aye.
Mr. Chair, the motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we'll move on to reports by the jurisdictions. NBTC, I do not have any update there. Mr. Alcorn, do you? Anything Mr. Letourneau passed along?
I do not today. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. The District of Columbia, Deputy Mayor Babers.
Yes, thank you. The only thing I have is that I want to just announce that the District of Columbia did announce that its capital bike share program would be free for 30 days for DC residents.
All right, thank you so much. Secretary Slater, WSTC.
Nothing to report. Thank you.
Okay. And the federal government, Ms. Klein.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to take this opportunity to just note one thing, which is that October is National Disability Employment Awareness Month, to recognize the contributions of people with disabilities to America's workplaces and the economy. And this year's theme is America's Recovery Powered by Inclusion, which reflects the importance of ensuring people with disabilities have full access to employment and community involvement as we recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. I just wanted to say that there are millions of Americans who have disabilities related to hearing, vision, cognitive issues, or other mobility issues. And I know that Metro has a number of programs in place in addition to the access that we provide for riders with disabilities, also serving as a place that that is encouraging and open to people with disabilities as employees. And I just want to say on behalf of myself and Ms. Martin Proctor that we encourage Metro to continue in these activities. We look forward to working on them further. So that is our statement for October. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, with no further business to come before the board, we stand adjourned and we will move to our reconvened executive session. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today.